Hi everyone. Today is the 31st of January 2018 in New Zealand. So we want to talk about what giving birth is to women and whether it is the number one thing in women's lives or not. When I gave birth in 1970 first, it wasn't considered the number one thing. In fact, generations and generations of women knew giving birth was big, it was monumental, it was dynamic, it was something you couldn't plan, you never knew what your birth was going to be like, it happened to you, you either coped well, had a reasonable birth, or it was terrible and you thought you were going to die. You either came away with, you were healthy and your baby was healthy, or you came away with problems that were unfortunate. But the birth itself was not considered to be the most significant event. In fact, women would often say to one another, as soon as it's over, you forget the pain, which tells you that women are saying it's not the most remarkable thing. Once it's over with. Because generations of women really put much more attention on having the baby. And this is actually true globally. So I've worked a lot in third world countries, not involved in birth, but I've lived in a lot of traditional communities, very different religiously and culturally. And birth is very dynamic. It's very focused on because it has innate dangers to it. So in traditional communities where there is no medical care, birth is very, very important because it's an activity that can result in really negative consequences to the mother or child. But the focus and the memory about life is not about the birth. It is about having a child. So birth is something that we either remember or we don't remember. And I've talked to tens and thousands of women worldwide. And by far the largest percent of women don't remember much about their births. So by the time I gave birth again in 1982, the focus through the natural birth advocates and the great authors of the time was that birth was the most important thing. And it was interesting because there was a lot of therapies going on, like primal screaming and rebirthing, which was saying that all of our trauma was originated from how we were born. Well, that can't be true. My mother gave birth to me, she said, in the easiest 3-hour labor possibly. But I still had emotional traumas in my life due to circumstances that had nothing to do with births. So it's really important for us to understand that at the present time, or since the 1980s, the focus has been on the birth. The same way the focus began to shift on the wedding rather than the marriage. So what are we going to do about this? We have women who have this massive expectation that the birth is going to unfold in the way that they want the birth plan. But in the back of every woman's mind, we are hardwired as humans to know that there's no way to know what our birth's going to be like. It's unpredictable. And so we actually know that planning for a birth is iffy at the best and probably silly at the worst. However, we want to stay in control. We want to have some idea. We want to know something. We want something that gives us some control. And that's why women are so invested in their weddings, because they feel that they can control something by deciding what the flowers are and what kind of silverware. And somehow this investment into the wedding is about having control, really, about the marriage. But the fact is that weddings are celebrations. They're cultural celebrations. And since we've started to plan births have become part of cultural celebrations. We believe we can plan a birth and we can celebrate a birth rather than this long thing called raising kids, which doesn't feel as though it's celebrated much. So we're stuck at the moment. We're in a trend that's dying. The choice-focused trend has been in effect since the 80s. We're in 2018, and it's not working for people. And that's why we as Common Knowledge Trust and the Birthing Better Families have been saying since the 1970s, really, don't go down the path where you just elevate choices. Because at that time, there were skills. The skills, as I've said before in these talks, the Lamaze, the Bradley, the Grantley, Dick Reed, were very, very focused on a small, tiny percent of women who wanted a natural birth, who believed they could have a pain-free labor, and wanted less medical care. The majority, vast majority of women are happy as Larry that the medical profession is there, and women in third world countries where it doesn't exist want it. Now, there are a lot of issues around the medical profession. We can talk more about that, but the fact is that coming from traditional communities with no medical care, they know that birth has lots of dangers, and they love medical care. They know measles had lots of dangers. They knew getting a cut could have lots of dangers. So they embraced antibiotics. They embraced immunizations because polio is less, measles less, children are dying less. So up until the Second World War, all cultures lost 25% of all of their children under the age of 5 before immunizations and antibiotics became widely available. And women died in childbirth, and they died after childbirth from sepsis, what was called milk fever. We have such short-term memories. The medical profession has become more sophisticated, cesareans have become easier and safer, and we think it's always been that way. It hasn't always been that way. So the focus has never been on the birth. It has been in the sense that people want women to survive birth. They want babies to survive birth. But to have a birth, something you plan and unfold the way you'd like it, it was never part of the conversation. And then it became the only conversation. And sadly, because not enough women had achieved what the skills-focused approach was. So if you use skills, you could have a natural birth, pain-free labor, and less medical care. Not enough women could achieve that for lots of reasons that we've talked about in other of these talks. So the new generation of birth advocates in the 70s and 80s said, okay, women should choose. You shouldn't have just these standards of care. And everything that the medical profession does to you really are just interventions that are imposed on you and unnecessary. Because before medical care, of course all women birth beautifully. And that was a myth in itself. So when they shifted and said, skills don't work, so let's give women choice. That's going to work. Well, it didn't work. Besides which, when you say, let's give women choice, and you do that from the background in your mind, that skills are going to produce natural, pain-free, less medical care births, in your mind you are saying women will choose less medical care, and therefore they will have pain-free births with less medical care and more natural births. They didn't expect, when you opened up choice, that more women were going to choose epidurals than cesareans. As cesareans got cheaper and epidurals began to be regulated more. But that's what's happened. In New Zealand, that has a midwifery model of care with everybody having their continuity of care midwife, with a profession that advocates natural birth and believes in natural birth and elevates choice as something really that you respect as a midwife when you get a client. 3 out of 4 women have interventions of some form, and the cesarean rate has more than doubled from 12% to almost 30%, and the epidural rate's sky high. So choice, when you say choice, you need to be willing to accept that people are going to choose more medical care. That's what happens. So we need to understand, we need to focus on the birth. So how do we focus on birth as being a good experience for people? And that's where we, as Birthing Better Families, want to tell you, become skilled, okay? Let's remove skills from this ideal, natural birth, pain-free labor, less medical care, and just go, everyone should be skilled. It's an activity 100% of pregnant women are going to do, one way or the other. The one way or the other means you never know what your birth's going to be like, but you are going to give birth. And if you see birth, if you see giving birth, which is such a weak verb, what does that mean? It means it's an activity. It means it's going to take time. You have to do it over time, even if that time means getting in the car, driving to the hospital, going into the hospital, being prepped, and having surgery. That's time. You're doing it. This is your baby's birth. So we want you to become skilled. We want you to enjoy preparing your body to give birth, because even if you're having an elective cesarean, the hormones in your body are preparing your body to labor and have a vaginal birth, which means your mind is going down that way. But your mind knows intellectually, I'm going to have an elective cesarean, either because you want one, which is fine for us, still use your skills, or because you need one, but you would have liked not to have one. That's fine. Still use your skills. It's your baby's birth. Or because you're pressured, which means that you're really pissed off. But if you're skilled, you focus on using your skills and you just say, okay, this is what's going to unfold, and I'm going to skillfully birth my baby because this is my baby and I want to make my birth good. So if you want to make your birth good, you need to become skilled. You need to first prepare your body, and the skills that Birthing Better offers are different than other skills-based resources because there have become more. Active Birth by Janet Velasquez, Hypnobirthing, Hypnobabies, Calm Birth, Birthing Within. All of these are wonderful resources. They are focused on achieving a natural birth and a pain-free birth with less medical care. Birthing Better families, they just didn't care. It was their baby's birth. They just wanted to skillfully birth their baby. And they wanted to learn in the privacy of their own home. So we're an online class for you to take at home with lessons for you to do. Some of the resources in our resource you're not going to be interested in. If you're birthing in hospital, don't read the ebooks about birth center or home birth or transferring, because it's not going to happen to you. If you're trying for a VBAC, then you're going to want to read the VBAC information. In fact, get the VBAC course instead. So you can pick and choose which of the skills that you want to learn. You don't have to say, okay, I've got to go A through B and C and D and E. That's not the point. The point is that if you're focusing on your birth as a highlight experience, then you have to do something to make it a highlight experience. You can't expect them to give you a better birth. You have to expect you to birth better as your birth unfolds. And this is why there is a myth around birth being the most important experience in a woman's life. It is dynamic, but a lot of us don't remember it. I don't remember my first birth, which was I used Lamaze, as well as I remember my second birth when I used these skills that I helped develop in the early 70s, because I had been with hundreds and hundreds of families using these skills. And the reality is that these skills worked better because they were adjustable. They were adaptable. I could use layers of skills. I knew how to stay open. Lamaze didn't give me that information. I knew how to soften inside my pelvis. Lamaze and Bradley were external relaxation rather than internal relaxation. I understood that there were 5 phases of every contraction rather than they were not particularly intense, and then they were terribly intense, and I could cope with these, but I couldn't cope with these. Knowing there were 5 phases of contractions meant that I could set up the skills that I wanted to use at the beginning of every contraction. I could modify the skills as the contraction got more intense. And during the peak, if my mind was going F, 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 that only lasted 15 seconds. And then I could come down off that contraction, softening, staying open, calming my breathing, knowing how to let go of the energy. And then in between contractions, really opening up, doing the pelvic clock, staying open, knowing what I needed to do to conserve my energy in the hard work of what I was doing. So and I can remember 34 years later, almost every single second of that birth. And that birth was not at home. It was in a strange hospital. That birth was not a natural birth. I gave birth to my son 8 weeks premature. Do you think that they wanted to fiddle with me? Of course they did. Did that mean that I started to think, oh my God, I'm not going to have a natural birth because I have all these interventions? It didn't even cross my mind. My labor was going on. So I was birthing, and I made a commitment in my mind to use the skills that we had developed because I knew that they worked. I had seen a lot of people do them. So I'm privileged. I developed them. I saw hundreds of people use them. However, we are the teacher in the course. You get the skills from all of those families. And I'm actually even in it, but 20 years older now. So how can you help spread these debunking myths series? One is share these videos. Tell people about them. Do you want your friends and relatives to go into birth thinking this is going to be like a wedding and therefore their marriage is going to be great afterwards? No, you want people to be realistic about birth. You want yourself to be realistic about your birth. We want you to know that these are on YouTube in a playlist called Debunking the Myths in Childbirth. We want you to like our pages. We want you to buy our resource because all the proceeds go back to a trust. We want you to give it as a gift to families that you love. And we want you to make comments, ask questions, because when Facebook makes these changes, it's going to be harder for us to be seen. So we want women to have a good birth experience. The point is not to take that away from women. The point is, how do women achieve it? And they achieve it by becoming skilled and having their partners share a same set of skills, working together throughout their baby's birth. And when they do that, when they commit to doing that, no matter where they birth, whoever's present or what happens to them or around them at a birth, they will remember that birth because they will remember the sense of having worked through it with skills. And that leaves people feeling dignified and proud, because often birth is dynamic and people feel challenged by it. And when you overcome the challenge through using skills, you feel dignified. And that's important. And bad things can happen in that challenge. You feel dignified. You met the challenges with a set of skills that kept you present and working through that activity. So I'm going to stop now. I still have a few more debunking the myths, and then I'm going to do a series on the truths about childbirth. And if you want any other series, please let me know. What would you like me to be talking about so that we can change the childbirth trend and begin to marry skills and choice? Because what do we know? Choices are fickle, they change, you never know what your birth's going to be like. A lot of women don't have the choices that they might like or envision, but everyone can use skills. Everyone can use skills. Everyone can use skills to birth their baby, but they need to have learned them, and practice them, and then use them. So see you later. Bye-bye.